We talk about analysis and stuff. We talk about things like filler, where people will get data and then they just sort of scattershot the information. Again, this is not disparaging anybody. It's just a pattern that we've seen. And yours isn't like that. You look at the information and it's coherent. You've got coherent chunks, but those chunks are also consistent across a larger arc. It's just really interesting to see. Like, again, the rows kept coming up. So you just put down what you get. And each page where that information came out strengthens that connection point, but it also reveals more depth because it's a multifaceted component, that rows, in terms of the information that's communicated out from it in your session work. And this is not just the rows. So I'm saying, like, it's also replicated in other elements. And that's what I find to be very interesting about this.
That's what I think I see in our work, that there's multi-layered meaning. And I think that happens in the work of other advanced remote viewers. But if you don't have the analysis to make sense of it, to break apart the different layers of meaning, then you're missing so much. Before we go, you brought something up that I want to maybe emphasize a little bit, especially in the context of this session. I think it's a good example. The sense of filler. I was getting Mesopotamian kings and seals, and I could have injected my own beliefs, my own knowledge about these things, created a little bit of a narrative based on what I think. I'm so careful not to do that. And I can see in this session the value in not doing that, because you can trust my data better. It allows me then to move into the data that wants to come through. And sometimes you might think it's one thing, but it's not, right? So if I had just done a whole session on the Mesopotamian kings, that would be useless data. Whereas I record the data that comes through. I don't put my own beliefs in. I don't tell my own story. A lot of people fill their session with stories, with fiction, or with their own beliefs, or, oh, they read an article about something, so they're going to put that in as though it's remote viewing data, but it's not remote viewing data. And I think it's really important to separate that out so that you allow room for more complex data. Maybe some of your beliefs are wrong, so you don't want to be injecting that. You might think they're right, but there might be some finding in 10 years that disproves something that everyone thought was true.
Yes, and that's the reality boxes that Ingo Swann has referenced in he's got a book on it. He discusses that concept of being kind of trapped within a subset of a lexicon of information, and you're trapped in there, so you can only work with that. But in your work, what I see is trying to be honest with the information that comes from the signal, just put it down. Because I suspect you're probably like me in that you'll do a chunk, like you do whatever page, and you'll have some coherency there. At least for me, when I'm in that state, I'm not necessarily trying to figure out what's going on in the session. It's I'm too busy just trying to track down what the signal's communicating to me. I'm assuming some of this you had chunks on this page, that page, but at no point did you really stop to reflect on that. You're just pushing through and producing the data. Is that kind of correct?
Yes, I never do in-session analysis. I think that is helpful as well, because you're not making fake associations that are convenient to your ego in the moment at the expense of truth.
Yeah. And the other thing in terms of filler that I see, or we've talked about, is sort of this large volume of nouns and verbs and adjectives and things like that to describe the information they're getting, which again is nothing wrong with that. But the problem is that if you have too much of that spread across too much of a spectrum and you don't ever kind of really collate it, the whole thing, like it never kind of moves in a direction where you go like all this volume and then you kind of narrow it down to this scope here and it's very clearly kind of articulated. It really doesn't get to that point. Then this back volume here could be so broad that it literally can apply to almost anything. So this is the other problem. But in this work, in this session that people will see, I don't see that. It's very compartmentalized pieces of specific data that have coherency. And when you look at the coherency back to the target, it's very obvious. And like you said, the other thing that we have seen in our work and others, it's not just us, it's a marker of a level of capability that people should try to work towards, is getting data that is not necessarily known.
Yes.
By anyone specifically or talked about in any public way, but then it comes out later as like, oh, this is legit real. And it's like, well, I had that in my data. Well, that's an indication of you trying to pull the data from the signal in a more pure fashion, not judge it, not bias it, just get it down and kind of move on. And that, to me, when you see anybody's session work that shows that kind of information, I think that people should take note of that particular viewer, because when you see the result actually is something that isn't known.
Yes.
It's quite fascinating, right?
I think that's the important thing, is probe for more data always. But never use data from your own thoughts and beliefs, just the pure data. And don't try to make sense of it in the session. Maybe it doesn't make sense in the moment. That's fine.
So if any of you have any information or insights into this session work that you see here, we haven't touched upon, we would love to hear about it. You will see from her session work there is a lot of what we would see in the conspiracy sector associated with this kind of ritual and kings and queens and things like that. And so we find that to be interesting.
And my full session will be available on Patreon.
So let us know your thoughts, and we appreciate your time.
Have a good night, or have a good day. Goodbye.
Bye.